Okay, we are recording now. John, would you be able to?
Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome. Welcome to this study of the Persian Bayan. And we are going to continue this week. It is June 29th, and it is with Peter Terry. Now, Peter has an interesting issue today. He had a power outage. We apologize about the power outage. Now, with regards to the power outage, he is with his family. They're in a confined area, but he's still able to meet with us as we've scheduled for this time. So we appreciate it. Thank you, Peter, for being available for us. Thank you very much. And I have a question, Jeremiah. What is the number of this session, please?
The number of this session is, I just had it pulled up. It's the Persian Bayan session number 10, and it covers, it covers Vahid VII.
Vahid
That's
VII.
correct. That's correct.
Pages 367 to 416, a total of 49 pages.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so we are going to be covering this content today, and thank you, Jeremiah. We appreciate all of your questions. We're going to start off with what Peter had mentioned. Peter, could you, you said that someone had their reflections to share?
Yeah, let me just repeat that.
Thank you.
Yes, those are, occasionally you will hear those sort of sound effects. That's my youngest. A talented vocalist in the making, I'm sure. So Lucinda has written me a wonderful posting sharing her thoughts and findings on the Bob's discussion of equilibrium. And I wanted to ask if she could share them with everybody, and if Jeremiah would help us to figure out how to do that so that everybody gets a copy of them, and so that everybody will know how to respond to everyone, so that we all get to see, hear what you have to say in response to her comments. This is the sort of thing that we, if we had a classroom, we'd be doing this all the time, and it is possible to do it on a virtual sort of classroom like Zoom, but we have to take the right measures, and we have to make sure that you can reply to all. And so if Jeremiah, if you could explain how that can be done, that will also be something that goes out to the live stream, and then anybody who logs in to Facebook and so forth will be able to get that same information. That would be very helpful. So if you could do that now, then I'll wait until you finish and then we'll start.
Well, I'd actually like to just understand a little bit more from Lucinda. So if you would just go ahead and tell us what you came up with, and then I can figure out what we could do on the back end as far as being able to disseminate that.
So she sent me an email, and so either she could send the same email to you and then you could send it out to everybody, or I could send it also to you. But the idea would be, how would you get it to all of the users? How would it be available to everyone, including people on Facebook and any other social media?
Well, we could create a shared document just like you have for the notes and put it up there, and then we could link it on the website directly.
Okay, so Lucinda, would you like to send that directly to Jeremiah? If so, then I'll leave it to you that way. If you wanted to do any editing of the message, you can do that before you send it out.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to be sure I was on the right track.
You're on the right track.
All of it? Really?
Yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And the reason why I think it's particularly wonderful is because you're unedited. Your thoughts are coming from a very deep place, from really thinking through what could this possibly mean. And I think that that's why it's really going to be of value to other people, is because they'll do the same thing. They'll read it and they'll go, oh, that makes me think of this. It makes me think of that. And that's the sort of associative thinking that so often gets us to a more profound understanding of something than just doing purely an analytical, intellectual analysis.
Okay. All right. So you want me to share my talk about my outline, or just
why don't you take what you sent to me, add or doctor it in any way if you wish,
okay,
and then send it on to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is going to share it with everybody else.
Okay, we'll do that. Yeah, because Sharon had a really good input about justice that I did not get on here.
Well, then why don't you do that? Add Sharon's insight on justice, and then because it's going to get to her, then she's going to respond for sure.
Oh, good. That would be good, because these are just thoughts, and I started out with just one sentence, and then it just kind of expanded. Had a life of its own.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, good. Okay.
So now, if you could, now that we've settled that that's going to happen, and that will happen soon, if we could, let's delve into, or dive into rather, Vahid VII. It's a long one. It's complicated. There's a lot of material, and if possible, we want to get through all of 7 today, because this is session 10. Right? Because otherwise, we're going to have to extend the number of sessions of this class in order to cover the entire Persian Bayan, which wouldn't do any harm to any of us, but some of you might have plans. So, and I want to thank you again for reserving this time every Wednesday for 2 hours to study this book. It's a really big commitment, actually, and like with all really big commitments, they pay off.
They do.
So let's go directly to Vahid VII. I just saw the text, and then the text disappeared. Let's see. Here we go. Screen sharing. Okay. Vahid VII, Bob 1. We're not surprised that the first Bob is talking about how important perfection and beauty are. Aesthetics are a big part of the Bob's teachings, and that's one of the reasons why you come across him talking about writing in the most beautiful handwriting, and why it was permitted to wear silk, which was not permitted under some Islamic laws, because silk is a beautiful fabric, and it's but there are other things also. It's been pointed out that probably the description of the tattoos that were recommended for believers to wear on their chests were tattoos made with henna. They were not permanent tattoos, in all likelihood, because there's no tradition of that in the Middle East. There is a tradition of henna, of using henna to inscribe certain things. And the idea of putting the verses of God, obviously in the most beautiful script as well, on the actual body of the person is also a matter of aesthetics. It's a matter of it's a law that's a divine law, but it's also an aesthetic law. It's about beauty, and then we come to interesting point where he says all books must be replaced with new copies after 202 years. This recalls a law of the Kitab Aqdas that the furnishings of your household should be renewed every 19 years. And this also speaks to aesthetics. When you own things in your house and you're using them all the time, they wear out, especially if you have a family. And so, again, sort of the idea of making sure that you have beauty, that you're surrounded by beauty, because beauty is important. Beauty is one of the attributes of God. And in fact, we call Baha'u'llah, him whom God shall make manifest, is called the blessed beauty. He's also called the blessed perfection. So these two things of perfection and beauty are there underscored by the Bab in the Persian Bayan. The third point there talks about there being 19 different styles of writing, and all of them being good, but the best is what is called the most glorious, or Abha, which is, of course, another allusion to Baha'u'llah. And elsewhere, as we've seen, he refers to this as Shikaste, as the handwriting that is called Shikaste. Then he goes on to say it is preferable to become perfect in one of the styles than to write all of the 19 styles imperfectly. And this speaks very much to the Bab's emphasis on quality. Quality is way more important to the Bab than quantity. It doesn't matter how much you can do or how many things you can do. It matters that whatever you do very well. And then, of course, he wishes that the Persian Bayan and his other writings be written in the highest standard of perfection and beauty, so that they are inspiring everything else that is being done. So that this is the highest standard, and every other kind of writing is going to aspire to become like it. And also, as you see on point 5, the disseminating, printing, and writing of the verses of the Bab are all praiseworthy, for they promote the faith of God. That all the steps that you have to take in order to make the writings of the Bab available are promoting the faith. And so they're all praiseworthy. And so the Bab was not simply emphasizing making copies of things. He wasn't simply emphasizing teaching the faith and in what we would call firesides. It's everything we do that gets the word out there and to touch people and transform their lives. In Bab 2, again, he's reiterated a point that the true Babi is the one who's transformed by his faith in the Bab and in Persian Bayan, to the extent that everything that he does in obedience to the Bab and the Persian Bayan, and that he is also preparing for the day when him whom God shall make manifest will appear, so that he will be able to recognize him. Then you go to 7. This, we may be used to, those of you who are maybe close to my age will recollect that back in the old days, we used to talk about God consciousness. And it was mostly Hindus and Buddhists who would talk about those sort of things, especially Hindus and New Age people. But the Bab is talking about God consciousness in a very real sense, that when everything that we do and everything that we think and all the recitation of the verses of the manifestation are being done with intent, then our consciousness of the world is changed, because we're constantly remembering God in all things. That makes for a different life than to be constantly thinking about yourself or even other people. Let's go to 3. We've seen this before. It's a good thing to lend money to people, and it's a good thing for those who borrow money to pay it back as soon as they can. Both of those are actually really important points, because it's encouraging generosity. It's encouraging us to take care of other people and not only think of ourselves. And it's also saying that once you've borrowed, you have an obligation to pay back. Nothing comes free in this life. Everything has to be paid back. And when it's paid back, then you have proven your faith in God, because it's the right thing to do. It's our actions that really count the most. The fourth Bob, he's speaking about a month of self-purification. Well, we all know what that is. That's the month of fasting. That's the month of Allah. And he expresses what is the purpose of this law. And of course, he goes into quite a bit of detail about this and of all the other laws. But ultimately, as in all the laws of the Bayan, it is to prepare the Babis to recognize him whom God shall make manifest. Then, and actually, number 10 is a very important point. I've been thinking a lot about this because of the debate about abortion that's going on in the United States, which has people up in a flurry and very radically differing from one another in their perspectives. And I think it's so important for us to recall what the Bab says about true knowledge. The absolute knowledge of us, of any of us, is God's alone. We don't really know what the intentions, the purposes, and the predilections even of our fellow human beings are. Most of the time, we don't even know what ours are. And we have to be really humble and really merciful with our fellow human beings, because we have to understand that we have such limited vision. We only see things from our perspective. And consequently, it is God alone who sees who is wise. And when we have that degree of humility and that degree of mercy towards each other, then we manage to find the way that is not only just, but loving and kind. And so, we're used to reading that sort of thing from Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. We're not used to reading that from the Bab. The Bab so often comes across as being very, very clear boundaries, clear sense of right and wrong. But ultimately, he comes down on the side of mercy. Ultimately, he comes down by saying, we don't know. So there's so many things we don't know, and we have to leave it to God. When you leave it to God, then very often you do find out the truth. But it's not going to be that that severe sense that we so often feel in our hearts that causes us to judge other people and consider that they're wrong and that they're, somehow not even worthy of our association. I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time in reiterating the teachings of the Bayan in Bab 5, but basically it's a summary of everything that he's covered, his basic teachings, but none of his laws. So it may be that you can go back to these summaries of his teachings and study them and then correlate them to the teachings of Baha'u'llah and understand what it is that, what are the fundamentally essential or perennial teachings of the religion of God that get expounded by the Bab and then also by Baha'u'llah. So in other words, you don't have to go back and read the entire Persian Bayan to have a good summary of what his teachings are. You just have to pick those few abwab, those few babs that do summaries. And we've done this maybe two or three times before, where he's done a summary, and maybe a comparison of the summaries would determine which summary is the most complete, or maybe they're complementary with each other. That's something for people to investigate for themselves. Then we go to 6. This is, all right, number 6 forbids believers from carrying instruments of war unless they are being engaged in a holy war in the path of God or transported by arms manufacturers. Well, clearly that has been reiterated. The first part was reiterated by Baha'u'llah. In the Kitab Aqdas, you'll find a verse where he says very specifically, those who do not need to carry arms must not. It's forbidden, right? And of course, holy war is abolished. So, right? And that means if you don't have holy war and you only have instruments of war used by people who have to have them, namely your military or police, if you conceive of them, then you're not going to have a whole lot of arms being manufactured and transported. It's going to cut way, way down on the supply. I would say that this is a law that is meant to be implemented globally, as it is with Baha'u'llah. It's a global implementation. You can't just implement something like this in one country and have it work for everybody. In fact, this was the discovery, the attitude of the Jewish people after the Second World War, which was that, or a significant number of the Jewish people, was that this is never again going to happen to us because we're not going to let it happen to us. But the world was not prepared at the time of the rise of Hitler to stop him. And so if you will go and you make changes like this, and you get one group of nations to adopt the laws and another group of nations don't adopt them, then the ones who didn't adopt them end up eating the ones who did. You see what I mean? So, and Abdu'l-Baha talks about this principle in Some Answered Questions, is that you cannot have sheep living with wolves. Someone's got to stop the wolves or they will eat all the sheep. So the implementation of this law needs to be universal, and it needs to be backed up with a plan to stop aggression. And as we know, that plan is called the Lesser Peace. It was described in quite some detail by Baha'u'llah and by Abdu'l-Baha. So this is, when we look at point 13, the purpose of this law is to remove the fear of one another, that is, of our fellow human beings, the fear from our hearts. I think that it's so important for us to remember that the Bab has a tender heart. The manifestation has a more tender heart than anybody else in the world. Christians, I think, understand this, better than a lot of people of faith. They understand that Jesus loves us. Well, the Bab loves us, and as much or more, because the manifestations are all the manifestations of all the attributes and names of God. And now we come to another point, which is very interesting, about how it's very important for each person to associate with persons of their own rank and profession and not associate closely with people who are of higher or lower rank than themselves. Just in brief, that has been completely, changed by Baha'u'llah, because Baha'u'llah more or less removes the whole question of rank. And he says the most important thing is to associate freely with people of all backgrounds. Then this is a very emphatic point in 15. Fear those things by which the souls of men are tormented. Worthy of very much meditation on all of our parts. Obviously, this is a case in which the words of the manifestation require a lot of thought to consider all of the possible meanings and how those can be applied in our lives. I'm reminded, for example, of the prayer that we often say, is there any remover of difficulties save God? That's a very short statement, and it's a question. And we've been thinking about those few words for 150 years. They've been a really profound influence on so many souls to consider, is there anyone other than God who actually fixes any problem that we have? It causes more of us to turn to God than perhaps any other verse. But this is a good one too, a really good one. Fear those things by which the souls of men are tormented. And then he says, fear all of you. So 7, the seventh Bob reiterates something we've seen in previous statements, that the manifestation of God is infinitely superior and more perfect than any created being. This is one of the distinguishing doctrines of the Babi and Baha'i faith, and one that you can see in less clear form in previous religions. There have been a lot of debates about this, of course, the station of the manifestation in previous religions. Baha'i faith makes it very clear that the manifestation is of a different order of being and is the intermediary between God and the human being. And that makes it that much easier for us to understand why we owe him obedience and why we owe him allegiance and love. Because it's not that he's a foreign being. No, he's definitely a being created by God. But he is an exalted being and a being who knows so much better than we know. The 8th Bob goes into different significances of the number of unity of 19. And actually, this is I found this to just be charming, is that we're, each one of the Bobbies is enjoined to go and have a particular tablet, and on this tablet, he is to write a name of the God, one of the names of God, in one space each day. And if he misses out, then his family has an obligation to fill in the days that he forgot to fill in. I don't know why I find that so charming, but it's sort of like keeping a diary, a journal. But the journal, the most important thing about the journal is not whether you went to the dentist today and the drugstore tomorrow and all that sort of stuff. The most important thing was to remember one of the names and attributes of God that day, and to contemplate that name, and to in effect dedicate that day to that name. This is going to be probably incomprehensible to future generations of people, why the Bob would regulate the price of pens in a scripture. Except think about it this way. At the time that he revealed these words, the only way that the writings of the manifestation could be shared with other people was by writing them with a quill. And so if the quills were really expensive to buy, then it became very difficult to disseminate those writings on a mass scale. So I think it's really the principle more than anything else, is to think you want to find every means to make it possible to disseminate those writings to as many people as possible. And so that is in effect, that's the calling that we get in reading about the price of pens, is how do we make it possible to spread the word and have it actually read. Ninth Bob, we have something about the monarchs. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, this whole topic of the relationship of monarchs to the Bab and to Baha'u'llah, I highly recommend that you read The Promised Day Has Come by Shoghi Effendi. It's really the textbook on the subject. And it will give you an understanding of the fact that the whole idea of monarchy is not passé as far as the manifestation is concerned. It's not as if because we don't have guardians anymore for at least this dispensation, and most of the monarchs are out of a job since basically the First World War. It doesn't mean that it's over, and we're going to have democracies and nothing but democracies. This is, a lot of us think that. But then you go read The Promised Day Has Come, and it will change your thinking about it. And then you'll go back and you'll read the Bab and go, oh, okay. So what he was talking about is actually relevant to not only our time, but to the future. And how that is relevant is something that's quite a challenge for the modern mind to conceive of, is to think that how could the idea of a hereditary ruler have any validity in the ontology of the world, in the structure of the world. And I commend it to your thought. I commend especially reading that book to your thought. Then in 20, we see something we've seen before. The verses of each manifestation eclipse those of the previous manifestation. And that is to say, that is not to deny that they may reaffirm the same truths. In many cases, they do. But to mean that their authority eclipses, because those of the current manifestation, of the most recent manifestation, are the rule book for that new dispensation of human history. And this is such an important teaching of the faith, this teaching of progressive revelation, because if you do not have this affirmation of the most important book being the most recent one, then we're going to live perennially in a pluralistic world. And a pluralistic world cannot, by definition, become a completely united world. Baha'u'llah's vision of the world is ultimately that the entire world embraces the revelation of God. And that is the revelation, the most recent and most complete revelation of God. It's not that we're going to constantly be living together with such diverse laws and perceptions of reality as we have for thousands and thousands of years. This is the promised day in which every religion has predicted that we will all follow one law and one messenger. And so you have that in very clearly described over and over in the Persian Bayan. And in 21, you have, again, an affirmation of the importance of him whom God shall make manifest, and the capacity of the manifestation to flip the scales. You maybe are familiar with the Messiah by George Frederick Handel. And there's a passage from Isaiah that he sets to music. And it's probably one of the best known passages in Scripture because it has a musical setting that everybody is performing every Sunday. I mean, every Christmas or every Easter. And it says, every valley shall be exalted, and out every mountain shall be made plain. So made plain in the sense of being flattened, okay? And this you find in Quran as well as in the Bible, as well as in the Gospels, as well as in the Baha'i writings, as well as in the Bab's writings, is this idea when the manifestation comes, there's a great reversal, is what Baha'u'llah calls it in the Kitab-i Aqdas. And the great reversal happens that those who are high fall and those who are low are raised up. And why? Because invariably those who are high oppose the manifestation and want to perpetuate the existing order of things because it's to their benefit to do so. And then why are those who are abased are raised up is because they most likely are the ones who recognize the manifestation because they don't have anything invested in keeping the old order. They have not done so well under the old order because they've been oppressed in many cases by those in power. And so those people are the people who recognize the manifestation and who then bring this new world order into being. Now in 10, we have more about this table in which we're to be ascribing the names of God. Someday I'm gonna persuade one of my particularly insightful and knowledgeable friends to write something about this idea, because I find it personally so fascinating that we would create these basically. It's like a mural. It's almost like a mural or something like a mural where we're writing the names of God and we're to be organizing them in a thoughtful manner so that we don't leave anything out. And it's a daily obligation. And how does that reinforce our spirituality, our sense of connection with God? Now, theoretically, I have no problem understanding this because anything we do that is bringing the names and attributes of God to our conscious mind, to reflection, is going to be bringing us closer to a spiritual understanding, anything we do. And this is why it's so important for us to say that prayer of 95 times the Allah Abha, or why it's the obligatory prayer is so important to say every day. And by the way, this is sort of, I won't say it's hidden, but it's in the notes to the, or in the questions and answers to the Kitab-i Aqdas that maybe we don't study enough. Let me put it that way. And that there's a very important statement in there, which says that if you miss your obligatory prayer, you can say this verse and it covers you, you know? I really recommend that you find that verse because we forget. All of us forget. At one time or another, we get caught up in our lives and we even forget to say the short obligatory prayer, let alone the long one. And this one, and then we feel bad. We feel like, well, I didn't do the right thing, you know, shame on me. But Baha'u'llah doesn't say shame on me. He says, say this other verse. And it's the equivalent of you saying your obligatory prayer. So you can say it the next day even, and it still counts. All right, so I'm going to go back to Vahid 11, Bab 11. Here's an interesting thing. He wants believers to sit on chairs and couches and not on the ground. Now, why do you suppose he would say that? My understanding of it is it's very closely related to cleanliness. And it's very closely related to exalting the noble calling of the human being. Human beings are not, we're not from the earth. Where our very origins come from heaven and earth at the same time. And then from the moment of birth, we are constantly growing closer to the divine and becoming more and more distant from the earthly side of our existence. And so I think this is a very interesting point for people to think about. Next, he talks about the self of the manifestation manifests the self of God. Contemplation of this point will help people to understand why it is that Baha'u'llah does talk so frequently about the self of God. For example, in his statement that, that we can experience the self of God standing within us. That could be full of wrong interpretations. There's no doubt about it. It would be entirely possible for Baha'is to imagine that we're all manifestations of God, or that we are all sort of incarnations of God, even though our writings tell us that that's not the case. But rather, it's to see that this image of God, which is reflected perfectly by the manifestation, is something that each one of us can actually experience inside of ourselves, in our own contemplation, in our dreams. I don't know if you've encountered these dreams, but there are some wonderful dreams in which the manifestations appear. And you then read about the effect that this has had on people's lives. And I think this is pretty common. I mean, I'm not a very visionary guy. I don't get a whole lot of, great dreams, to be honest with you. But I've had a dream with both Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha in it. And that really set my hair on end, even non-existent hair, because I thought, if they're going to bother to appear to me in a dream, well, I guess I better pay pretty close attention to that. It's not a message for anybody else. They had a message for me, and I find that our sharing of those experiences is extremely confirming. I had an experience where a friend told me about an appearance of Abdu'l-Baha. And when I heard that experience, it had a huge impact on me. And seriously, immediately, I was in tears. And it's not my rational mind that was responding, it was my soul responding. And this is so important because to consider this mystical realm of truth is because the Guardian says the mystical message of the faith is the core message. And this is what we are dedicating our lives to. And everything else is subordinate to it. It's our connection with the divine that is the most important. Then we have, let's go. We know already the verses of God are the highest testimony. We know that those who do not obey God are not being truthful. And actually, if you recall, there's a passage in Gleanings where Baha'u'llah says the same thing, where he says something really challenging. He says, if you don't believe in God, you can't be truthful. You are not truthful. Well, what does that mean? Well, you're obviously, if you're not really connected with God, then you are not capable of understanding the full truth. Now, you might know some of the truth. Of course, it's not to say that you can't be truthful to some degree or to some, it's not to mean that you're a liar. but it's to mean that the full nature of truth is only revealed to the soul that loves God. And that truth is, as we've found, is not a truth of a sword. It's a healing remedy for all of our ills. This one will be very appealing to all of us. I assume that most of us, when we first encountered the faith, we loved the fact that there were no priests. No priests, no clergy, no ministers. Good grief. Boy, aren't we glad we got rid of them. It's very interesting. The Bab is expounding this truth. The people who follow the dictates and imitate the lives of their religious teachers are not followers of the truth. Boy, this is the Bab setting it out right there, because they don't see it for themselves. That's what we have to do. That is why Abdu'l-Baha said there were two principles that were the most important principles of the faith. One of them, the unity of mankind. The second one, the independent investigation of reality. There is no search for truth that is legitimate unless it's free. You can't be compelled to believe, because that's not real belief. Let's see. I think we've covered all of these other teachings of 11, except that good. 30 reiterates this. Only those who accept the new manifestation by virtue of their own volition and the clarity of their own judgment are true believers. That's reinforcing that this is a matter of personal conviction. And I have quite an extraordinary statement made by Baha'u'llah to Nabil and a group of other Babis, which I'll share with you maybe in advance of the next class, which talks about what this matter of volition is. In the 12th, we're looking again at restatement of fundamental teachings of the Bab. And in the 13, again, reiteration of the value of the verses of the manifestation, and in particularly those of him whom God shall make manifest. This is very interesting thing when he says he requires all of his followers to have a sheet of paper with 19 verses written in the handwriting of the manifestation of God, and that this applies to both him and in the day of him whom God shall make manifest, to that manifestation as well, and in each subsequent manifestation of God. So just to point out, many Persian Baha'i families received tablets from the Bab, from Baha'u'llah, from Abdu'l-Baha, and they treasure those tablets. And in many cases, they in order so that the texts of those tablets would be shared with the world, they have sent the originals, or they've made copies and they've sent them to the World Center. But you will still meet Baha'is who have a tablet or several tablets sometimes from Baha'u'llah or the Bab. And if they become very close friends with you, they might show the original. And I think this is where they're coming from. I think they're coming from knowing and may not even have read the Persian Bayan themselves, but their ancestors read the Persian Bayan. And they understood that in the Bab's view, actually possessing a copy in the handwriting of a manifestation was something that was of a value that we can't compare to anything else. It's so precious. I remember I had dinner once with Mildred Motaheda. It was a wonderful Baha'i, served the faith in many ways, lived to a very advanced age, lived in New York. And Mildred had, she had little vials of the dried blood of Baha'u'llah. She had hair from Baha'u'llah that were given to her by members of the family of Baha'u'llah. And when she felt particularly close to somebody, she would show those particular things. And it reminds me of pilgrimage, because most of us only experience those things when we go on pilgrimage. And then in either experience, whether it's personal or whether it's on pilgrimage, you're seeing a realization of people having this reverence for that which had a direct connection to the manifestation. Let's go to 14. This one will sound very familiar. As you know, in the Kitab-i-Aqdas and in the tablets revealed after the Kitab-i-Aqdas, Baha'u'llah forbids the confession of sins to anyone but God. That came from the Persian Bayan. Now, of course, he did say that you can confess sins to the manifestation of God. In other words, to him whom God shall make manifest. You could confess them to him because he is God's representative on earth. But for those of us who are outliving, who are living in this world after his departure from it, we can confess to him as well. We can confess, because confessing them to God can also be confessing them to the manifestation of God. But they're not confessing them to anybody else. And of course, this makes for a radical, this is quite a radical teaching when you consider all of the ways in which it can be, understood and applied in our lives. It makes the relationship with God one that is of such intimacy that our greatest secrets are the secrets that we convey only to God. We don't convey them to our best friends. We don't convey them to our spouses. Those are something that we share with God alone. I'll tell you, I learned a little bit about what this means from my mother, because my mother taught me very early in life, don't talk about these really private things with anybody but God. Keep your own counsel. And of course, me being a rebellious blabbermouth, I did all the wrong things, but I've come to gradually learn that she was right. My mother's a very deep Baha'i, and so she doesn't just read these things and think, oh, well, that's nice, but she actually lives them. And when you live them, it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. Forgiveness sought through other channels is sought in vain, for only God can forgive the sins of men. Isn't that a revelation? It's like, what's the point of unveiling all of your imperfections to someone else when they can't do anything about it? It's only God who can do something out. Then on 15, we're going to pilgrimage, Shiraz, and we're going to let's keep going here. There's a passage here that you might be familiar with because Baha'u'llah cited it in Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, and I believe in maybe some other tablets. The germ that holdeth within itself the potentialities of the revelation that is to come is endowed with a potency superior to the combined forces of all those who follow me. Yes, and of course, the Guardian cited that in his letters as well. We've also seen this in 39, that the manifestation of God and God himself are immeasurably exalted above any need of their servants. This is a fond illusion of many people in the past that, you know, we need God, but he needs us just as much, you know. The Bob is constantly reminding people of how exalted God is, and that we are always in a state of, we are in a different realm of existence, and that we never partake of his existence. Because if we could become God, then God would not be God. In 16, he's talking about, we've seen this theme before where, you know, it was his wish that all the Babis would make a great effort, including any monarch who would embrace the Babi faith, to convert the entire world to the faith, in particular, so that there would be nobody on earth who would reject him whom God shall make manifest when he appeared. And then this is a reiteration in 41 of the places which were to be reserved specially for Babis in the event that you weren't able to convert the whole world, at least that those places would be. And those places were places in which the Shi'i faith, the Imami faith, the followers of the 12 Imams were concentrated. And as we've seen the same, we've seen this reference to commerce with Christians in another context, in another one of the Vahids. Now, in 17, in 43, Friday is made the special day of the week. It's a day set aside for purity, cleanliness, and rest. It is the equivalent of the Jewish Sabbath and the Christian Sunday. And it's a reiteration of what had become the practice in Islam. Although the practice in Islam was a focus on all the Muslims coming together in the mosque to worship together. Whereas the Bab does not make it necessary for people to come together. Instead, it's to dedicate every one of their acts on that particular day to God and to living as close to the spiritual teachings as possible. And it's very interesting because he says that on that day of the week, doing good is of greater value than any other day, which also makes it quite similar to the Sabbath, because that is the concept of the Sabbath in Judaism, is that on that day when you do good, it is of greater value spiritually than if you do it on any of the other 6 days of the week. Then he revealed a particular verse that was supposed to be recited on that day while facing the sun. Then in 18, he sets out some penalties for certain crimes and an abolition of other punishments. As you know, we discussed earlier, the Bab was not at all in favor of imprisonment. He generally encouraged people to be the penalties to be financial. And in 47, he says that violations against women bear a double penalty. In other words, if you do the hurt that you cause, the damage you cause a woman is going to cost you twice what it would cost to do the damage to a man. I think that's really fascinating. I don't know whether we have. I don't think the Kitab-i Aqdas has stated that principle, but it certainly has stated a principle over and over again that we must take care of those who are the most vulnerable. And that would include women, especially women who are taking care of children. Let's see, towards, I'm only seeing part of 18. Can you scroll a little bit here? Our scroll.
I'm sorry, Peter. Before we get too much further away, Lucinda had a question, I think.
Oh, okay.
Just a quick question. I didn't know if the Friday thing, the idea around the Friday statement that is in the Bayan, the Persian Bayan, did Baha'u'llah expand on that at all?
Yes. We have John Walbridge is a wonderful scholar, and he compiled a book in the course of writing articles for the Baha'i Encyclopedia Project. He wrote a book which I think is called Sacred Space, Sacred Time, or it might be Sacred Time, Sacred Space. I'm not sure which. And that book I think was published by either Kalimat or George Ronald. But if you look under John Walbridge, Walbridge, it's the last name, you will find that book. In that book, he quotes a tablet of Abdul Baha in which Abdul Baha says that in the future, the Friday will be the day that Baha'is observe a day of rest, and a day consecrated to entirely to spiritual things.
Yeah, I thought I'd read that somewhere before, but I just didn't know.
Yeah, so he gives the location of the original tablet in Persian and then translates that. That has not been implemented universally in the Baha'i community. And it in all probability, it will be implemented when the House of Justice considers that it's timely to do so. It may be a while because right now we have a lot of flexibility of being able to observe different days off because of the countries in which we live and the communities that we're part of. And it may be that it will be necessary to have a lot more Baha'is around for it to make sense practically to take a Friday off in effect. For now, actually, we're kind of the most flexible people on the earth because we don't have a weekly day off. So it means that if Christians want somebody to fill in on Sunday, we can do it. And if Jews want us to fill in on Saturday, we could do it. And if Muslims want us to fill out, well, we're working on Friday anyway. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. But someday we'll be probably all congregating at the local Mashriq Askar and saying prayers together and devoting the day to the things that are the most important in life.
Well, and the Friday is still, the blessings are still there because they were, put in place.
Exactly. So, Abdu'l-Bahad talks about this in one of his one of his addresses he gave in the United States is the Mashriq Oscar can be in your living room. The Mashriq Oscar can be any place. And so we can implement this ourselves. Any one of us can do this. And we can do, and by the way, until such time as it universally becomes, called upon by the House for everybody to do it on Friday, we can do it on any day. So it's to have a day that's a precious day that we dedicate. That seems to be the principle that's most important here, rather than which day it is. But if the person feels that really called to live it on a Friday, then they should do it. I think it's wonderful for Baha'is to hold firesides on Fridays, because this is an opportunity, and devotional gatherings too on Fridays, because this is a way of implementing this law, but doing it very soft, without any sort of expectation that everybody has to do it or everybody has to do it together or any of that, but just doing it. And then, because as he says, this is precious and this has spiritual, it has good karma. So good karma makes itself evident in our lives when we do it, not when we think about doing it or think about maybe someday doing it, but when we actually do it. Now, again, this is talking about how, he's very much against imprisonment and chaining of people who've committed some sort of offense. But then he makes it clear that this is particularly to protect him whom God shall make manifest when he is not yet manifest to the eyes of men. And to me, this is one of the most clear references to Baha'u'llah, apart from the references to Baha'u'llah all over the place in the Persian Bayan, okay? We've got him called by name. We have the beginning of the months, named by him. We have the beginning of the week. We have the beginning of the calendar year, all these references, and then references to the order of Baha'u'llah that will come into existence. But here, to say we shouldn't have imprisonment and we shouldn't have chaining because we want to protect him whom God shall make manifest. And we think that 4 years later, Baha'u'llah is in the Siachal, in the worst prison in Iran, chained. It's heartbreaking to think about that. And every Babi, and when Baha'u'llah is writing about this experience and it's being read initially by Babis, most of those people must have read the Persian Bayan. And they must have, when they read those words and heard his sufferings, they must have realized, how could we do this? How could we break contradict the wishes of the Bab in such an explicit manner? And when I say we, it's because the reason why Baha'u'llah ended up in prison in chains was not because of some wicked inspiration of the government or the clergy. It was because a Babi tried to assassinate the king. That's what happened. A Babi tried to do this. And then in their fury and their determination to protect the monarch from this happening again, they basically arrested all the Babis, threw them in prison, or killed them. So it was in reaction to what a Babi actually did. And so this is this is something that when a Bobby reads this, it must feel this deep sense of shame that the cause of this suffering to him whom God shall make manifest actually came from one of them, from one of their fellow believers. Well, it's, that sort of experience really makes you humble. It really makes you, when you realize that one of your own people has done a wrong that has had such great harm, then you really reconsider your own behavior, because you see that one wrong action can do so much damage. Now let's go to 19 so we have time for discussion. 19 is all about prayer. A lot of people ask this question: why do you Baha'is have all these written prayers? Why don't you just pray directly to God? Well, the Bab talks about this. He says the prayers of the manifestation are the highest prayers that can exist, because they are the prayers of this perfect mirror of God, which then we can use to address God. And so this is one of the bounties that he's expressing for the believer, is to be able to use the words of those who have a much higher rank spiritually than us to speak to God. So sure, we can speak to God in our own language, in our own words, and we should, and we do. But the most powerful prayers are those that are actually revealed by the manifestations. And by the way, Christians know this, because if Christians didn't know this, then why would they recite the Lord's Prayer all the time? If they really believed that any old prayer would do, they wouldn't be reciting the Lord's Prayer. But it's Jesus's prayer that really makes the difference. It's in his words. And the same thing applies here. These are the prayers of the Bab. And we know, Baha'u'llah talks about this principle of, he says, recite the verses of God that have been revealed to you and recited by those who are close to God. You know that passage that from the Gleanings that is in the very beginning of many prayer books, where he talks about, at first, if you say these prayers in the privacy of your chamber, you may not be aware of any change. It doesn't affect you, okay? But sooner or later, it will affect you. It will change you. And he also says that the fragrance, whatever, the spiritual impact of saying those prayers in the privacy of your chamber is having an influence of the souls of other people. This is the verses of God, folks. That's the verses of God have this influence. We shouldn't think that because we're going to sit in our privacy of our chamber and saying our own prayers in our own words, that they have the same potency as taking on the revelation and reciting these blessed verses revealed for our purpose. They are for us. They're not for him. They don't do anything. They don't give glory to him. They give glory to us for using them. And he says, look, the highest prayers, those of the greatest spiritual potency, are the prayers of the manifestation of God. And then the next rank of prayer is those of the letters of the living. And the letters of the living, as in a Baha'i context, would be Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. The Persian Baha'is have prayers by Shoghi Effendi, and they say them, and they have an influence. They will tell you that they've had really deep connection, feeling of connection with God by saying the prayers of the guardian. But of course, the guardian said, don't say the prayers, my prayers, say Baha'u'llah's prayers. That's the first priority. And that here again, we see this is a principle, this is a teaching that's found in the Persian Bayan. Let's see. Let's do, again, you know, the hierarchy of prayers is manifested in the hierarchy of existences. So as we know from the symbol that is displayed on the shrine of the Bab, and which is emblazoned on a ring that most or many Baha'is wear on their fingers, there are three conditions of existence: the condition of God, the condition of manifestation, and the condition of creation. And so the prayers themselves reflect this hierarchy. The prayers of the manifestation are, the prayers that are revealed by the manifestation are speaking to the world of God. But they are speaking to the world of God through that intermediation of manifestation. We could do a whole study of prayer, and should, you know, actually prayer is one of the more important things for Baha'is to understand, both for our own experience and also to be able to teach inquirers. Because, you know, it's one thing if you could teach them about the principles of the faith and maybe, you know, some of the more what seem like modern ideas. But when you could talk to them about prayer, you've got a different kind of listener, because there are people out there, whether they're part of a church or a mosque or any kind of other congregation, for whom prayer is an essential part of their lives. And when they hear that Baha'is have prayer, and that we really value prayer, and that we have prayers written in the words of the manifestation of God, that's something really different. That's something really new. There's only one prayer in the words of Jesus, one. And how many hundreds do we have written by Baha'u'llah? And how many almost innumerable by the Bab as well, and Abdul Baha. So let's see, are we, is this almost, I'm not seeing a conclusion to 19, but maybe there must be. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, 1 second, I have to give.
My snack.
Oh, here.
My snack.
Which one?
That's
Here.
my snack.
Which one?
Here's-
Mommy?
That's my little one.
Which one, Peter? What are you talking about?
Did you see them? No, wait. No, wait a second. It's not.
Mama,
I have to give car keys to somebody.
Daddy.
Yes, baby.
I want to have my snack.
That's to get in. All right.
Snack.
Yes. All right. All right. So I am now I'm looking forward to hear your questions and your comments, and anything you'd like to share. By the way, the whole rest of this particular Bab is about prayer. Goes into quite some detail about prayer. So I recommend for those who are ready to embark upon that subject to study them and to compare them to the Baha'i teachings on prayer, which many of them are contained in very fine compilations. And I seem to recall something excellent that was put together called Doa. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Doa. It's a book that was put together by an early American believer on prayer. And I believe that it's still in existence, still in print. So I see a hand up from Kirk.
Yes. Hi, Peter. Going way back to the beginning of Vahid VII, right to the beginning, there's a reference to 202 years. I found that on the surface to be very perplexing because there's much more time than 202 years between manifestations. So the throwing out the writings every 202 years, if it's literally true, would seem too early, too short of time. I was wondering if there's some other possible meaning of the 202 that you would consider possible.
Well, first of all, I don't think that the reference is throwing out the writings. I think it is a reference to dispensing with other possessions. And perhaps we could look at that again. Do you remember which Bob it's in?
That's right at the beginning of Vahid VII, Bob 1.
Bob 1.
Very beginning.
Okay,
whole thing.
Jeremiah, can we look at that in the summary just for a minute? No, you want 2-1. Yes, all right, thank you. Okay. Oh, yes, okay. All right, so this is new copies, all right? New copies. This is not that you're throwing away, you're not throwing away the book in itself. You're giving away or you're destroying old copies that have gotten ragged. And, you know, this is something that Bob has talked about in other verses of the Persian Bayan, is that he doesn't want his writings to get all raggedy and falling apart and the way Qurans are. Because he points out that there are many Qurans that are found in mosques or in homes that are in an awful shape, very bad shape. And he doesn't want that to happen with his writings. He wants the Persian Bayan to have beauty and to be kept in a very high state of material perfection, shall we put it that way. But I don't think that we should regard this as being anything other than a symbolic statement of protecting the value of a sacred book, or any book for that matter. As a book collector myself, I'm horrified by this because I love to collect old books, especially ones that are falling apart, and have them rebound and so forth. But practically speaking, I can't pick up an old book that's in a decrepit, state and actually use it, because it's going to fall apart on me. And this has happened. I received from my mother, she had a Bible that she was given at baptism. And I used it for many years. And then finally, I couldn't use it anymore because it kept falling apart on me. Parts would come out, pages or bunches of pages. It no longer was a useful instrument for my own study. And after all, the purpose of the book is to represent a text. It's, in itself, it only has a value because the outward value, because of its association with its inward contents. And so that's how I would understand that. And also, I think in the context of his many other references to books, the facts that he's always calling for there to be new copies to be made as beautiful as possible, replacing the old copy that you have with a new copy that is more beautiful, and then giving away the copy that you previously had to someone who will appreciate it, and then keeping the one that is the most beautiful in your possession as a sign of your devotion to that scripture. As a book lover, I have to say that as much as I was initially horrified that he's not encouraging the archival protection of old books, he is encouraging that new copies be furnished to people that are becoming, that are more beautiful and more useful than ever. And in a very real sense, I think we're experiencing that in the world today, is that you can, because we now have electronic versions of sacred books, we can access the texts in a way we never could before. We can research things, we can meditate on things, we can make them part of our lives in a way that only a few people in monasteries could do in the past, because, you had to be someplace where you could get all of these, not only old copies, but new copies of scriptures, and where you could have reference books, and you have concordances, and you had dictionaries, and have all these resources. And those were available in monasteries, and those were available in some very, very exceptional synagogue libraries. And those were found in universities. I remember when I went to the University of Chicago, and I found all kinds of books that I didn't ever see before in my life. Okay. But as soon as I left the University of Chicago, they were no longer available to me. And the internet is making them all available. And that is an extraordinary experience that's not reflected in this text, of course, because this text is speaking to a particular time, a time when books were handwritten, and handwritten and handled on a daily basis. So that's my understanding of what this meant in the time. It meant that we should have access to the best versions and the most beautiful versions of the Word of God that are available. And why he used 202 years? I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea, because the Bob knew perfectly well that in 19 years that Baha'u'llah was going to declare himself, him whom God shall make manifest. So he knew that this law, this commandment, was not going to be implemented unless him whom God shall make manifest, reiterated it. And it was entirely up to him to either, reiterate it or not. And of course, Baha'u'llah didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there might be a spiritual purpose other than the specific. But yeah, sorry, somebody's talking.
Perhaps it's reasonable that the law, as it's been in previous dispensations, it carried over to the current dispensation, those same laws. Perhaps that law is also carried over to this dispensation. It's possible that it is a matter of cleanliness that we are to do renewal of our literature to ensure that literature continues past the millennia and doesn't just get wiped out.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. I mean, we know that there are thousands and thousands of pages of the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah that are lost to us forever. We know that because they tell us that. And so the only way that you make sure that you have what's really precious for you is you have to make new copies. You can't just rely on the old copies you had. As many of you know, in antiquity, there was a library in Alexandria. And that in Alexandria is a city in Egypt. And in that library were kept Many, many, many books, thousands and thousands of books in manuscript. That's the only versions they had was manuscript. This is long before Gutenberg. And those books were, Alexandria was a great city of learning because of the library, because people would go there to study those books, and they'd find books there they couldn't find anyplace else, which meant nobody was making new copies. And when the Library of Alexandria burned to the ground, which it did, many thousands of books of antiquity were lost forever. Now, surely the Bob doesn't want that to ever happen, right? And I think this is a very clear, not only is he speaking to aesthetics and speaking to honoring the revelation of God by having beautiful and clean and not raggedy copies, but also he's talking to perpetuation. He's talking about the importance of making new copies, and so that they're always available. We always have available to us a copy that we can read for ourselves.
With
I'll just
yes. With that being said, the question that I have for you, Peter, is that if we're talking about renewal of literature, and I'm just saying I grew up going to a library and librarians told me what they do and why they do it. And a part of what they explained was what they do regularly with the books, telling me to take care that I don't break the binding and treat the book a certain way so it's respectful and I don't break the book, so to speak. These like standard of care for literature in a library. Also like Boolean search terms and all that, which is kind of, when you say Boolean search terms, it's harder for people that are not librarians to understand, but it's for searching for books in a library catalog. So all of these things, librarians have developed a science since, I don't know the history of the science of being a librarian, but I can say at least that the science they've developed to make sure that books are orderly and organized and clean and in good condition. It seems rational that people with libraries, and I'm talking not like the Library of Alexandria, but the Library of Congress today that we have in America, or any state-of-the-art library modern day, they will typically ensure that these processes are in place, right?
Well, one of the things that the manifestation does that is of unique value to us is the manifestation speaks to us about values which are not part of any particular value system at any one point in time. And what many of you may have experienced in your lives, and I've certainly experienced in mine, is that if Baha'i literature is to be preserved and to be accessible to people in the future, it's because we do something about it. If we don't do something about it, that literature is often goes missing from libraries, is stolen from libraries, is discarded by libraries, and is sold by libraries. And how do I know that? I have a very close friend in Germany who's made it very clear to me there's not a single university or public library in Germany that will keep Baha'i literature perpetually. They will not make a permanent commitment to keep that literature. They might take it for a period of time, but if somebody does not come and regularly show interest in the literature, then it will be discarded. And that's not just Germany, that's America. In my family lives in a little town in Maine called Bridgeton, and Bridgeton has a public library, and they have a statute of limitations for books in their library. They have a limited amount of space for for library books. And consequently, if a book is not taken out, if it's not used either in the library as a reference source or borrowed for a certain period of time, it's identified for putting out on the street in summertime for sale. Anybody can come and buy that book. And then whatever doesn't sell from that sale by the sidewalk is actually discarded. This is not just that little library in Bridgeton, Maine. This is major university libraries do this all the time. The only reason why I have discovered a huge collection of Baha'i-related material at Stanford University, which they have promised to keep. And why? Why have they done that? It's because they required the Baha'is to come up with an endowment to take care of the material, to scan it, make it electronically available, and they are strongly urging the Baha'is to come up with workshops, fellowships, conferences, ways in which that material can be used so that it has some value to their university community. But it was largely because we established the endowment, that they're going to keep it. And it's simply a statement of where we are in the world, is that if we don't find a way to protect our literature, it will disappear. Now, of course, the copies of the World Center may not disappear, but what if there's a terrible war at some time in the future and Haifa is bombed? I mean, we have to have copies of everything that's precious to us all over the place so that we're not vulnerable to seeing our writings destroyed ever. And it is a wonderful thing when things are scanned and made available on electronically. But also, let's remember, friends, there's electronic war going on now, okay? And it's entirely possible at some time in the future that vast collections of data will simply be deleted, that we won't be able to get access to that material anymore. So we shouldn't count on technology to protect us from things. We need to make sure that we have all our bases covered. And one of them is let's keep those materials in our own collections. By the way, you may have heard of some of those collections. You may have heard of the Afnan Library. Wonderful library that was started by Hand of the Cause Balyuzi and Mujan Momen, who was his close friend and assistant, who's gone on to be a terrific scholar. And after many years, they found themselves a site to keep their collection. They put a lot of it up online. The more people we get doing this sort of thing, the better for preserving and making accessible our material. Now, I see that Matthew.
Yeah, we have a couple of hands. Hold on, Peter. Kirk,
is Matthew related to John?
Aloha. This is John's mom.
Oh, hi, John's mom.
Aloha.
Aloha.
I just wanted a quick reference. I am a Persian Baha'i, and the book of Bayan in reality is the prescription for the future doctors to follow. It's a book for the physicians to follow. So sitting on the chair or being clean or eating with this fork and knife, all those things are the criteria for the physicians to teach the people how to live their life. And as you see, Bob mentions that we should eat fruit and vegetables more. than anything else. Everything Bob brought because he is the prescription for the future medical institution. And that's what the laws of science and religion should give hand in hand. And if when you get scientifically and religiously, when you see the book of Bob, the Bayan, you'll see what in reality everyone should do to have a healthy life. So sorry about that. I just want to give it some little extra thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. What's your name?
Sogand Scandary pills.
Wow. Okay. So again, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. The writings of the Bab are certainly very full of health prescriptions and prescriptions about cleanliness and about not just cleanliness in the sense of physical cleanliness, but also spiritual cleanliness. The importance of cleaning our minds and our hearts of impure thoughts and thinking of God and thinking of good things, and that this is essential to our health. And certainly there's a lot of correspondence between the teachings of the Bab and science. And this is going to be a great study for the future, that people will go into the Persian Bayan and other writings of the Bab and find a great deal of wisdom there. And I want to say this before I acknowledge Alex, and that is we must remember that the teachings of the manifestation have an eternal validity. Even though there are certain teachings that are changed by one manifestation subsequent to, in response to a certain need of an age, that most of the teachings of the manifestations actually are part of what we would call the perennial religion of God. They're for all time. They are benefiting people at all times. And Abdu'l-Baha even made this distinction where he called the perennial teachings the essential teachings of religion, the most important.
Yes.
And that the teachings of any particular period, that those were the ones that he even called them the secondary or the material teachings, because they're only pertaining to a particular dispensation. And so there's no doubt that people will study the Persian Bayan and find lots of connections between the teachings of the Bab in the Bayan and science and also other religions. And
particularly what I was mentioning is that the medicine in previous dispensations was not clearly specified. Medicine or health was not very, it was not discovered at that time. But during the Bab, and as you may know, to be a doctor in back time, they used to call them witches. They didn't believe in doctors. Or if you were in Iran or Arab or Saudi Arabia or whatever, people used to sit on the ground and eat. They eat with their fingers. They go into a public bath and they take a bath together, So now when the Bab came, he gave the specification what we need to do to make ourselves healthy. And these basic principles that you may see, like we are washing our feet three times in the summer, one time during the winter, those things that are brought by Bab or sitting on the chair, those are medical and scientific. When we sit on the ground, our spine is going to get hurt. But when we sit on the chair, it's not going to bring the same pressure to our back. So scientifically, medically, these doctors that they have been told that they are witches or witchcrafts or or whatever they used to call them. Now, these doctors can say scientifically and religiously that these things are true. So, and also psychologically, when we are clean, when we are have a high standard of living to be perfection, toward perfection, that these are all psychologically is going to bring health to ourselves. So we would be less ill mentally. Sorry about that. Talking too much.
No, you're not talking too much. You know, I've been participating in Baha'i studies for a long time now, and I've never seen anybody give a talk or present a paper on the teachings of the Bab on health, and they should. They should, because you're bringing up things that very few people know about, because very few people read this book, and very few people read other writings of the Bab. And so these are very important points, and I certainly look forward to speaking with you in the future about this, and encouraging some of my colleagues who have a greater knowledge of the languages to do this research and show this correlation, because I'm more familiar with what Abdul Baha has said about health, and also the tablet of medicine of Baha'u'llah than I am of the teachings of the Bab. Oh, they are.
Peter, I'd like to go to Don first, and then Alex. Yeah. We'll close out with Alex, because we're almost out of time.
Okay.
So I am very interested in this particular Vahid, in this, the matter of actions, our acts. And you indicated this at the beginning of your notes on Bab 2, where it's really talked about a lot, but then from there, it comes up again and again. And to me, this feels really critical to me, because I know that, like everyone else, I want to make a difference. And really what the Bab is talking about here is what actually makes a difference and what doesn't. And he talks about how, first of all, your acts need to be for God. But then he says, okay, what is that? What is for God? That means that your acts have to be, based on the recognition of the Son of Truth. Okay, what does that mean? That means not just that you have to recognize the new manifestation, but that you have to realize that all of those manifestations are ultimately from the same point. And then later, I saw something in Vahid 9 where, like he says, he's talking about acts again, and he says the quality of all things depends upon the will manifested in this world. So this gives a whole new meaning to what it is to do, to act. That just to be busy is absolutely meaningless. And even to do what we think of as good deeds is relatively meaningless. Although the Bab does say that he gives special compensation to certain people, according to his will, what he does, what he wants to do. But in general, as a general rule, you have to have this understanding, first recognition and understanding of divine unity, or you're not doing much good, right? So that seems like such a big thing to me.
As much as we, and not just Baha'is, but people of religious faith have tried to separate the mystical side of recognizing a manifestation, of recognizing all manifestations, of understanding to some degree the universality of revelation, as well as the specific instructions of any particular manifestation. as much as we have that, then we have this whole emphasis on action, on implementing things, you know, and so there's a tremendous sort of tension that has existed in religious communities about which do we favor, what's the most important, you know, and we know lots of people who can spend their entire lifetimes debating or emphasizing one side or the other. To me, what I find compelling about the Bab is that as much as he reminds us of correct doctrine, of the correct way of understanding things, of consciousness, he always brings us back to actions. What's going to be the value of pens? You know, how many times do we have to say this verse? You know, what are the conditions under which we make pilgrimage? We're supposed to be clean. We can wear silk. These are practical actions. This is not theoretical stuff. This is okay, fine. It's important for you to understand how the world is structured spiritually, but ultimately it's what you do with it. This is, at this point, I'm getting a summons from a 2.5-year-old who's calling me to action. Come here.
I can certainly wait for my question to next week. That's not a problem.
That's okay. Ask your question. But Dawn, I would really recommend go and do a search under action and deeds in the writings of Baha'u'llah. You will find it all over the place. Baha'u'llah says deeds are what it's all about. It's what we do. You know, we can have all the best ideas in the world, but if we don't do them, it's worth nothing.
Why not? I can do it. You can check it.
Alex, speak. I know.
I certainly can, but Jeremiah, John, if you want, if our time is up, I can easily hold this.
No, it's fine. Go ahead, Alex.
Okay. So my question is basically why the number 19? This Vahid, like all of the other Vahids, you know, he talked about 19 squares by 19 squares to put in the numbers. My question is, do we know anything about why the number 19? The only thing I have ever read or heard is that in the Bismillah in the Quran, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, those words are comprised of 19 letters. When the Bab changed his Bismillah, the name of God, the inaccessible, the most holy, those words are also comprised of 19 letters. But that still doesn't tell me why 19. So I'm wondering, did the Bab explain why? Even a pilgrim's note would be helpful for me. Do you have any insight into that?
Yes. 19 is, there's so many references to 19 and the meanings of 19. Yes. I'm listening to you. There are so many references in the writings of the Bab to the significance of 19, but I think to summarize what they refer to, it's all about oneness. It's about oneness, and it's about the whole structure of reality is based upon oneness. And as Abdul Baha said in many of his talks, reality is one. It's not, we don't live in multiple realities. We live in one reality. And in that reality, we have God. God is part of reality. God is real. Manifestation is real. This world is real. The next world is real. All these things are real. The material world is real. We don't deny as Baha'is that the material world doesn't exist. There are plenty of people in the past who said, no, the material world is, either non-existent, it's an illusion, or it's actually contrary. It interferes with our spiritual life. No, Baha'u'llah doesn't say that. He says this world is real, but there are a hierarchy of realities, and that's real too. right? And 19, so 19 is a symbolic representation of that unity. And apart from its symbolism of being one, what else could it, what other kind of value could it have? I mean, it could have, in the sense, a reality that it structures our lives. 19 is the basic unit of our calendar. 19 days times 19 months. And the Bob and even goes into, it's okay, baby. All right. He even goes into detail about 19-year cycles, right? Of the value of the 19-year cycle, which at this point, I don't think that Baha'is really have any consciousness, but we will. That'll come. And if there's a 19-year cycle, there must be a 361-year cycle also, because that's 19 times 19. And what will that mean for us? It's structuring our lives. If we structure our lives according to the basic symbolism of the unity of all things and the unity that derives from all of us come from God and to God shall we return, then this spiritualizes our lives. This makes our consciousness of life a very different one than if we're living day to day, hour to hour, and without any structure at all. Structure actually is tremendously liberating. Baha'u'llah talks about this in the Kitab-i Aqdas. He says, freedom, true freedom, is not to be found in our liberty to do whatever we want. It's in our submission to the law of God. Whoa! So this is what Jesus is talking about when he talks about also liberty. You shall seek the truth and the truth shall make you free. That's not a freedom that comes of do whatever you want. It's the freedom of living in complete harmony with the will of God. That's the real freedom. That's why, all the manifestations say that we're going to live in paradise. Paradise is a place of great joy. It's not like we're, grumpy all the time because we can't do all the things we really wanted to do. It's the point. It's the place where we go when we realize that, no, this really is the best for us. And we have the ultimate appreciation.
Peter,
thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Alex, thank you. We're going to go ahead and close out on that note. Any last words?
I'm gonna send you. I'll send you the next batch for our next meeting, and and I will. I'm going to take action now and swathe the stub toe of my daughter. But I'm going to send you notes for the next one in the next couple of days so that we can prepare for the next session. And as always, I really recommend, I welcome all of your comments and questions, and I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about Lucinda's insights and those of anyone else about equilibrium. I think the equilibrium is a very important issue because it has to do with balance. And balance is a fundamental principle of the religion of God.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.